Good afternoon. Hello and welcome to the HARC webinar series. Today we're joined by state and local cybersecurity experts discussing the most pressing cyber threats their agencies are facing, the steps they need to address them. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder and CEO over here at HARC. I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. I want to welcome all the attendees. Love to give special thanks to the Fortinet team for helping us put this together. I don't know, with the beginning of this pandemic, we were basically an in-person group, and while the going virtual has been really great for reaching lots of different places of the world, as you'll see on this panel, the first webinar we did was with Fortinet in Jim Richburg, like about a week after pandemic started. So definitely thanks to them and Shelly for helping us put this together. Before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to submit questions of their own in the Q&A on this platform. We'll be going through them throughout the panel and send them in. Also, remember, you answer the poll questions. I know we do a good job here at HARC, and the audience is fantastic, but that's kind of to ensure you get the CPE credits. And I'm scared of a few people. You know, the lady that's in the house with me, and the CPE people. They get irritated if we don't do what we're supposed to do, and I don't want them to pull our credits. So now we're going to meet our panel of experts today, and we'll go through just real quick introduction, and then we'll go into each of them. We'll talk a little bit about what their experiences are, for about 5 minutes or so. But just real quick, we'll just go. The first panelist is Michael Gregg, Chief Information Security Officer from the state of North Dakota. Welcome, Michael. See, I told you we're going to be all over the country today. Next, we have Alex Jackson, Chief Information Security Officer from the South Carolina Department of Revenue. Welcome, Alex. And then we have Lester Gotze, Chief Information Security Officer, County of Maricopa, Arizona. Welcome. And then we have Mike Watson from the Commonwealth of Virginia, I might add. That's where I live. Chief Information Security Officer, Virginia Information Technology Agency, Commonwealth of Virginia. Welcome, Mike. And last but certainly not least, my friend here, Jim Richburg, Public Sector Field Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President Information Security at Fortinet. He had a long time career in the government. And he's a man of all media, from my understanding. He was actually just got off a podcast with another part of HARC. So welcome. And maybe we could start off with you, Michael, from the state of North Dakota. What are the things that you're experiencing in your state? And, I definitely, if you can touch a little bit on the infrastructure, we'll ask a little more questions. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was recently passed, I think has a real opportunity to do some things with cybersecurity, if you'd like, in your opening comments. But Michael, take the floor from us.
Sure. Name's Michael Gregg, Chief Information Security Officer for the state of North Dakota. We've got about 250,000 endpoints in our environment. So one of the things that I've pushed very hard for over the last 2 years or so is really getting coverage for all our basic security tools out to those endpoints. That complete coverage and an ability to be able to see what's there, to me, is kind of a key to help you move from more, responsive mode to a prevent and detect model.
Thank you for that. And I have to say, my significant other watches Yellowstone, so we were looking at flights to try to get up there this summer. I think I'm not the first person that came up with that idea. It's going to be tough to get up to your state this summer now that everything's opened up. Welcome. Next, we'll go with Alex Jackson, Chief Information Security Officer, South Carolina Department of Revenue.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to meet everyone. So, Alex Jackson, South Carolina CISO, South Carolina Department of Revenue. Been here about 3.5 years or so. Been a CISO at a couple different state organizations here in the state of South Carolina. Also come from a military background, so that's really where I started my cyber IT career and just kind of transitioned over to state government.
Great. And where in the military did you serve?
So I had My first duty station was Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And then my second duty station was Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'm familiar with both those,
Yeah.
both those places. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
Next, we'll go with Lester Godsey, Chief Information Security Officer, County of Maricopa, Arizona.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good morning or afternoon to all of you, depending on where you're at in the world. It's morning here, and so again, Lester Godsey, CISO for Maricopa County. I'm sure Maricopa County, everybody's familiar with. We have a propensity to be in the news, whether we want to or not. But along those lines, just by way of context, Maricopa County by population is the fourth largest county in the United States with right around 4.5 million residents. And so some of the things that we are dealing with, and I know Tom's going to get into this a little bit later on the presentation, but a lot of our focus has been around mis and disinformation campaigns, in addition to all the other cybersecurity activities that we all have to contend with, and some of the unique challenges from a public sector perspective. So I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Lester. Next, we'll go with Mike Watson, Chief Information Security Officer, Virginia Information Technology Agency at the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me today. I'm always enjoy events like these. It's always a good time talking to my fellow security folks. I've been at the Commonwealth of Virginia for a while, since about 2006, in varying different roles, all in the security field. I've been the CISO at the state for the last, I guess it's about 9 years at this point, in working for and doing various things as far as initiative goes. As we know, cybersecurity has come a long way in about 10 years. Our biggest things that we're looking at now and trying to tackle is sort of our next evolution of the security model. It's been an interesting journey with some of the stuff that's happened with both of the COVID situation, pushing all of us out to remote locations and enforcing more digital transactions, as well as trying to figure out how we accommodate some aggressiveness towards government, whether it's from overseas or, as Lester started talking about, some of the misinformation, disinformation from unhappy parties. So it's been very interesting the last couple of years, and I expect that there's just more to come.
Yeah, that's for sure. And Jim, I'd love to hear your perspectives. I know you're in government, you're across industries, you're across verticals. I know you do state and local.
Well, thanks, Tom. So, of course, I had 34 years in the federal government, all of it in the intelligence community. I was the National Intelligence Manager for Cyber. So that meant I was the 3-star equivalent who was orchestrating what we did across the 17 federal agencies in the intelligence community on cyber. I worked on election security. I was running cyber threat intelligence for the US government. So, here I am now at Fortinet after my government career. And it's one of the largest cybersecurity providers out there. The odds are 3 times greater you're going to run into a Fortinet firewall than anybody else's. But the reality is they've got over 50 different parts of the attack surface covered with capabilities. So this puts me in a position where, I'm still working with people on election security. I'm still working with them on cyber threat intelligence. We made the pivot to remote. And now the latest thing that I think touches on the themes a couple of you guys have already raised, with the geopolitical climate we're in, I think we know how to do a security operations center for an enterprise or for a government agency. Where we continue to fail, and this is something I struggled with doing in federal government, was how do you federate that? How do you do that across a sector, across a state? How do you generate that kind of situational awareness? How do you integrate the response? So that's one where I'm working with large jurisdictions, with states, with an international organization to help them figure out what works, what doesn't work.
Great, thank you for that, Jim. And I'll just kind of dive right into it. We've been in a pandemic now for over 2 years. What is the nature of the attacks look like? And it's, it doesn't just have to be related to pandemic. We have some events going on in Ukraine. I'll just go right to you, Lester. We'll let you lead this one off since you seem to be the center of all this activity.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. So,
no problem.
Yeah, so the short answer, whether it's pandemic or not, going back just briefly to the 2020 election cycle, legitimately we saw all sorts of cyber attacks. So whether it's, and this is all public knowledge, so I'm not disclosing anything inappropriate. Yeah, DDoS attacks, data scraping, malware attempts, phishing, business email compromise, and active mis and disinformation campaigns. Speaking of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, some of the stats that I shared with our management was, and so we do geo-blocking at multiple control levels, if you will, firewall, MFA, SSO, for authentication purposes, et cetera, et cetera. So the day of the actual invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we saw the number of blocked network connection attempts from Russian IP address space double. That weekend, we saw that number go up to almost 10 times what the normal baseline is from the typical traffic we saw. And in some cases, when the Conti ransomware had the internal infighting where one of their members disclosed a bunch of private information, we took advantage of that data and looked for over 13,000 unique IOCs within our environment to see if there was any evidence of that. We fortunately saw no successful evidence of that, but we did see attempts based off of those IOCs. And honestly, we've been working with our federal partners. There have been one or two instances that I can't disclose where we've been working collaboratively with our federal partners, and we saw attempts from Russian nation states to infiltrate us. And so I guess one of the things I would share with the audience is these geopolitical things aren't just a federal problem, and it's not even just a state problem. We're Maricopa County, we're local government. Granted, we're on the larger side, but I suspect everybody, if you're not seeing this sort of evidence, you're probably not looking hard enough, would be my assumption.
Great. Thank you, Lester. Alex, how about we go with you?
Yeah, so the short answer is, I kind of echo what Lester's saying. We've just been seeing a steady increase, right, in all types of cyber attacks. And I'll go back to, my background, my history sort of shades how I see this, because coming from the military, where we're pretty intelligence rich community, then going to a state government where the intelligence is not as available, is not as rich, is not as actionable and specific, particularly to your agency and department. I struggled at first at my first job. How do I apply, this intelligence to sort of mitigate the threats and the attacks that are out there? But to what, we've been seeing here recently, within the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of these attacks, cyber attacks, whether it be from Russia, China, usually they were targeted at the federal government. At the state level, we weren't too concerned about it. If anything, we worry about phishing attacks, from your script kiddies or someone, your sort of low level players. But now, we have to be more on guard because the number of cyber attacks has dramatically, and we're talking about millions on millions, has increased just the number of attacks that we're blocking, at our firewall edge and, the state as well. So we're, I would say the primary attack that we're worried about is still social engineering, but we're just seeing an increase of everything across the board.
Yeah, was your department in particular, Department of Revenue, do they peak? Are they doing sophisticated things just for your department, or is it, I'd just be kind of curious. Are they just doing general type of message across the whole state?
From my perspective, it's still general. I don't know, and like I said, we don't live in an intelligence-rich community, so I don't see any targeted specific attacks against my organization.
Great. Thank you for that. Michael?
I'd actually mirror the
North Dakota, Michael, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'd actually there echo the comments Lester and Alex made. We're kind of in the same situation, or been in the same situation. So one of the big things we've done is increase that intelligence sharing. So one with the federal partners. The second piece would be in-state. So we've set up where we now have monthly calls with cities, counties, schools, you name it, all the political subdivisions. We go out and we talk to them every month. We communicate, we share what's going on. We allow them to share what's going on. We try to find out what's happening. The other piece we've done where North Dakota's kind of led in this is we've set up the state's first joint state SOC. So we've partnered now with about 5 different states, and we're sharing intel with those other states. So we not only share that intel, but we've gone an additional step, and we use Verus tagging. So we tag it the same way the Verizon breach report is, and we tag that data to make it more consumable by our partners.
Fantastic. Great. And Mike Watson?
I know it's always tough when you got multiple mics. I always say the president you haven't had a good event until you get the 2 or 3 of us on the line at the same time. So in Virginia we've been seeing a lot of, I'll say, interesting style, and I'll we're seeing a lot of the same stuff as other folks are, right? Increases in activity across the board. Some of it tied to, I'll say, planning and preparation, and some of it tied to actions directly, trying to get into systems. We know that, this is kind of the first significant conflict that's involved like direct action against a country or direct involvement from multiple countries where there's a viable, cyber actor. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the background, and I know Alex probably has tons of great stories and information that he can't even share. Same with you, Jim, that have happened as far as federal government involved. But the one thing that we know about cyber is that it's able to reach directly to our citizens and directly to us as organizations versus the physical military conflict, which has to kind of stay wherever the conflict is happening. So I think we're in that kind of unique situation where no one's 100% sure where that line's going to be. We are, as government employees, doing our best to make sure that we're prepared and understand what's happening. But there's a little bit of wait and see how far this goes and what's involved, with this as things progress. I always think the other part that's a little bit interesting for us is, while the states are doing and localities and other government entities are doing their best to make sure we're prepared, we also know that a lot of critical infrastructure is in private sector, held by private hands. So, we're doing our best. And I know a lot of folks have already been doing this for a while, of making sure that we're making those connections and understand, what's the impact if electric, gets impacted, or water, or any of our other critical infrastructure utilities. But we do know, as all of us, on the line here do know and understand that those are, I'll say, real things that we have to worry about, with the way things are trending. That's both, due to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, as well as just our general future state. We know, we've seen reports for years about people trying to, and specifically tied to, foreign actors trying to get into electrical grids and other places. So I think, it's sort of put the accelerator on a bit, and we're doing our best to make sure that we're walking that very unclear line about how do we prepare our private sector folks, as well as how do we at states and locals and other government entities make sure that we're ready to go in the case something does happen.
Thank you, Mike. Jim?
So all of my co-panelists have already mentioned nation state APT activity, and that's the question I get from state and local government all the time. Given the changing dynamic of cyber conflict, am I in the crosshairs, or at least likely to be caught in the crossfire as collateral damage, given the way cyber activity changes? But let me say that I'm surprised that we're 20 minutes almost into a discussion of threat with state and local government, and nobody has mentioned the R word yet, ransomware. If we were having this conversation last year, that clearly would have been top of mind. We were all sitting there saying, how do I prevent myself from getting totally locked down on ransomware? And look, I think ransomware, to be fair, is still the gift that keeps on giving, the thing that we're afraid of. And I think part of it is because ransomware has offered these criminal actors a steady revenue stream. It was not like botnets or crypto mining where how valid and valuable it was fluctuated based on, what law enforcement was doing, what technology companies are doing. Ransomware always seems to work. So we're starting to see the rise of advanced persistent crime that's starting to emulate advanced persistent threat activity by nation states. These groups are cohesive. They can spend more time on research. They're faster to weaponize exploits. They're so specialized, they have help desks for their affiliates and for their customers. So that's something that we're starting to spend a lot of time on. It's not only crime, it's crime that is becoming faster, more sophisticated, more clandestine, like the nation state activity we've been discussing.
Jim, I'm glad you brought it up. That was like kind of headed to our next direction, but let's do a poll real quick. And it's really a poll on what do you view as most significant cyber threat to your organization? And you can go a lot of different ways with this. I remember in the old days, we had this, A and B and C and D and everything else. But I think let's hear back from the audience and see what we have there. I think when you go back to ransomware, not trying to skew the results, there's been school systems closed. Albuquerque school system was closed because of ransomware. Okay. Thanks for bringing us back on point. Yes. So can we put that back up? Sorry, I didn't. I probably closed it. Is it up so everybody can see it? Can we put that back up? Okay, great. Thanks. Disruption, destructive attack, insider threat. Interesting. Ransomware's up there, huh? It seems like is that a state issue or a local issue or both? Mike, you're smiling, so you get to answer the question.
I was going to say that I think that's an everyone issue. It's definitely, it does not discriminate against state, local, private, anybody. And I do think that even, and Jim's comments, right, like, last year that would be the thing that was absolutely at top of everyone's mind. I think we're sort of hitting that stage, sort of where we were with the credit card breaches a little while back, right? Where we know exactly what it is that needs to be done. We know how to make these not be a problem, but actually getting it done with resources and stuff can be challenging, but we actually know what to do. And the actions that we know how to take and know what to do to protect the environment will limit the damage attached to a lot of the ransomware attacks. I think the successful areas that we see that are either organizations that don't have the resources to put the right controls in place, or leadership doesn't generally understand just how much of a threat and the opportunity that they actually are to get hit by something like that. We as much as like we embrace cybersecurity here at the state, and I know like a lot of other places do as well. I can tell you that, talking to some of our, smaller government counterparts, right? We've got very rural areas, they don't necessarily understand that just hitting something like that will cripple them, pretty significantly. And it is not an easy thing for them to recover. When you got, in Southwest Virginia, it's a relatively rural. So, you've got one IT guy shared between 3 different counties doing a lot of the work. It's not going to be something where they're able to get them back up and running in, a week or two. It'll take them months, and you've got revenue challenges and everything else that come into play then. So it's not going away. I think we just kind of understand what to do.
I think the thing I would pile on to what Mike said is, I think we know how to deal with, and I hate to say classic ransomware for something that's not that old, but the ransomware that encrypted your data and held you hostage, we know how to deal with. The fact that most ransomware now steals some or all of your data and threatens to do something with, having all the timely offline backups in the world isn't going to help you if the threat is doxing or publication. So you've all mentioned cyber threat intelligence, and I use this one as a poster child for why you need to at least remain informed, because if you say ransomware, I got backups, check the box, and I say, okay, well, is the worst threat to you the publication of either your citizen-facing data or if you're a company, your crown jewel IP? If that's the problem, all backups in the world aren't going to help if that's really what you're worried about.
Yeah, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Lester, how did your war room look like last year when you were talking about ransomware with everybody?
Yeah, so Our war room, it's a funny you call it that. That's actually the approach we took with the 2020 election preparedness. We called it our election war room, if you will. So customize specific incident response plans around around the elections. And so we've done that, whether it's for ransomware, whether it's a business email compromise, phishing attack, et cetera, et cetera. So we have plans, we exercise those on a regular basis. You know, I would say part of that from a planning perspective is it's one thing to have those plans in place, but if you don't actually exercise and practice those, then that's an entirely different problem. I know Michael and I have had some side conversations to this not too long ago with regards to ensuring that we know what to do along those lines. And one of the biggest challenges, I would say, and kind of to Jim's point about intelligence sharing and dissemination of information, is the communication aspect of that war room planning along those lines. So in the case of the 2020 election, and as we get prepared for the 2022 election cycle, one of the heavy areas of emphasis is identifying who the key players are and what the communication protocols, frequency, and methods by which we share that information occurs along those lines. And so in the case of the 2020 election, we had hourly reporting cycles to not only internal departments within Maricopa County, but the Secretary of State here in Arizona, our three-letter agency partners. And then as we prepare for the 2022 election cycle, that communication is going to be expanded to other agencies at the federal level as well as the state. And so, but that's something that we would not be able to determine if we hadn't planned and we hadn't executed in practice, identify where those gaps are. And so I think those are things, no matter where you fit into the public sector ecosystem, you fit into that cog. You might be on the tail end of that, but you might be in the middle of it, or if you're a federal agency, you may be at top of the food chain, and working out what those communications are is critical.
Great, Lester. Something you said that really struck me is, and I quote the great philosopher Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So yes, you definitely have to prepare though. Thank you. Can we go over to you, Michael Gregg?
Yeah, sure. I'd have to echo what Lester said. I think a big piece of it, one, is sharpening the saw, making sure that you not only have a plan, but you practice that plan. But the other one, kind of going back to what Jim mentioned earlier, is ransomware is not going to go away. I think the last Sophos report that I'd seen showed ransomware, a year ago at about 760,000 average remediation costs. That's more than doubled now to 1.8 million. So those costs continue to go up, just like what Jim pointed to. A lot of that because it's not just denial of access to the data, it's that exposure of that sensitive data that could be put on the dark web. So one of the things we've done in the state is we, in the last legislative session, had House Bill 1314 passed, which mandated that all entities, cities, schools, counties, everyone report any ransomware or any other security event they have. Because the sooner we know of it, the sooner we can get in there and deal with it, the less collateral damage there will be, and the better we can do to really work and remediate that situation.
Great, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so when you put the poll up there, ransomware wasn't at the top of my list. I know it's a sort of an industry trend, but so I'll kind of pivot on this question because it's not something that I lose. I know it's a risk, I know it's a threat, but I don't lose a whole lot of sleep over ransomware at this particular point, just because in our agency we've taken we do have a relatively high posture, and we've taken sort of a risk averse approach to a lot of organizations have moved to the cloud. We're still largely on premise, and we've done a pretty good job of micro segmentation, and also done a pretty good job of hardening our environment against threats and training our users against phishing. So when it comes to ransomware, I know it's a threat, but we don't particularly worry about that so much. I was surprised to see on the survey there that supply chain attacks wasn't on there, because that is something that I think about supply chain attacks, especially with a lot of people going to the cloud using Microsoft 365. Microsoft is a huge attack surface. I'm not, knock on wood there, but there's things that we think about. I think for us, insider threat is one thing. We worry about individuals with elevated privileges and what sorts of unsavory things they could potentially do, and having to respond to incidents like that in the past.
Interesting. Well, that's going to lead me into the favorite topic. Jim, we haven't mentioned it one time, which has surprised me. Zero trust, right? How is your zero trust policies coming along? We have one question. It's kind of like really around zero trust around identity, which is a facet of zero trust. Maybe you could start us off, Jim. What do you see? Where the maturity of where folks are on zero trust as you make your way across governments?
So zero trust is to a degree old wine in new bottles. It seems like most of my co-panelists have worked in federal government, done national security. We all came from environments where it was need to know based. So the federal government really pioneered this idea of segmenting access and even segmenting networks. And then industry figured out how to do this. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I would encounter former colleagues from government who were skeptical that you could really do it. And I said, look, you give me the luxury of a greenfields build, I think we can get there. The thing that changed things was Executive Order 14028, when President Biden basically said, across the federal government, I want you to move to zero trust. And then people put out a maturity model and a strategy. They were told to accelerate migration to the cloud consistent with that. So now people are starting to do it. Now, and I blame the marketers for this. Zero trust is a terrible name, especially for people who are in positions of trust and security. They go, wait a minute, it sounds very Orwellian. It sounds like here I am working in the public service. I'm sacrificing, financially, my lifestyle and everything. And you're telling me, and then we have to, so part of this is you have to message to the workforce of what this really is. But I think, Tom, we really are making progress. The federal government has actually got a good effort underway on minimally viable zero trust, because to build the whole thing out is tough. But I think you can baby step your way through it. Part of it is identity, identity management. Part of it is access control. Part of it is having the enforcement engine. No one part of it can get totally disjointed, but you can baby step your way into getting something that is dynamic and effective.
Okay, great. Lester, maybe we'll start with you. I mean, I know you have like security plans. Does this executive order that comes out and subsequent guidance from like CISA and other folks, how does that affect your game plan trying to get to zero trust posture?
Yeah, so, and I'm sure Jim will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the executive order applies to executive federal departments only. And so technically as a local government, I'm not required to do that. However, whenever the federal government does something, we obviously want to pay attention and we want to be in lockstep. And frankly, for us on the call, it's additional fodder for me to go back to my management and say, this is something we need to pursue. In the case of Maricopa County, it's kind of fortuitous from a timing perspective, because among other things, I'm also spearheading our effort on reevaluating our enterprise network holistically. And so as a result, we're baking in the need to migrate eventually to a zero trust based enterprise network for Maricopa County. So timing's been good, but really, and it's funny, we've been talking about identity. We're also spearheading that effort as well on a strategic initiative across Maricopa County and its 56 different departments on identity and access management. And so those two are inextricably linked to one another. So you can't really effectively have zero trust in place without having your arms around identity, and not just individual identity, but the device identity, service identity, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is really baked into everything that we do along those lines. And I would also echo, when I filled out the survey just a couple of minutes ago, I also picked insider threat as well. And so because we've seen evidence of insider threat as it relates to certain activities along the elections, et cetera, et cetera. And so all these things are all interrelated, and then subsequently will impact our security posture as it relates to being able to provide protections at an organizational level. So from my concerns around insider threat, if we can get our arms around identity, then we have a better basis by which we can then determine if there's anomalous behavior, or should this function or user really be traversing the network in this fashion, or is this stereotypical behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So we're taking active steps along the lines of implementing insider threat technology, but in a lot of instances, that's going to be our success along those lines is going to be predicated by our ability to make that zero trust journey for the enterprise as a whole.
And we have a question, if I can kind of incorporate the question we're already talking about while I have you. How important are Nist cyber frameworks to states, and how's your view on state RAM? If you could just finish up with that, and then everybody else is like, you know, zero trust, how much do you look at the Fed's guidance that has been out there?
So I might be.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so let me preface this by saying I might be on the minority of all the panelists here, which I'm happy to take those arrows. But I've just recently had a talk where I kind of talked about the importance of frameworks. And honestly, from my perspective, it's been more of a situation where I've been in public sector my entire professional career. And so along those lines, it's been less of an issue on what framework you pick as opposed to picking a standard framework and then executing against it, because honestly, it's been my experience most government agencies don't do a great job aligning to whatever framework they pick. So we standardize on Nist and we find that it meets our needs. I think the one outstanding criteria is to ensure that based off of what your compliance requirements are, that the framework you pick is flexible enough to address those the lowest common denominators.
Right, great. Michael from North Dakota.
Yeah, for us, the journey for zero trust is ongoing. I would say it's not so much the technology piece of it. That's certainly part of it. But the other side is the process and the people, getting everything moved over, which certainly takes a considerable amount of time and work to get done. On the side of frameworks, we actually do follow generally the Nist frameworks. I see that as a big one, especially like Nist 853 and the cybersecurity framework. And for us, that's been one of the key ones we've worked on, because if we can reduce risk coming into the environment, we lower the overall amount of work and the remedial work that we have to do going through. So if we can do third-party risk management, if we can evaluate vendors before we bring them on board, if we can verify they have the proper security controls in place, that reduces our incidents and our other types of work that we have to do long term.
Great, smart. Alex?
Yeah, so I just want to, I think Jim, when it comes to zero trust, I think Jim hit the nail on the head. Old wine and new bottles, I would agree 100%. I think zero trust is a rebranding of least privilege for the cloud, you know, and I think it's a marketing term really, you know, for me, because, you know, in a risk averse or high posture environment, you know, it sort of gives some encouragement or some hope to organizations that want to move toward the cloud, in that, you know, this marketing term says, hey, you can move towards the cloud and have a secure environment as well. You know, it kind of gives you hope when, you know, from my perspective, you know, I don't think the cloud is as mature as, you know, on premise at this particular point. So, you know, that's, you know, in terms of zero trust. Also, I would say that, you know, when I was trying to get spun up on zero trust, I read the NSA's paper on embracing zero trust. So I think that's a really good resource, and, you know, let's shed some light on that. As far as frameworks go, we're primarily a Nist shop, but we're working on integrating the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well.
Great, great. Mike Watson?
Right. Yeah, and I'll, you know, a lot of great points from my fellow panelists here, and I think you know, for the zero trust thing, I've found this kind of interesting, because I do think, you know, to I think Lester's point, you know, never waste a good marketing opportunity to get funding. That is, you know, sort of where we're headed with it, especially for our localities. You know, we have very, as I mentioned before, very disparate situations out there. And we're trying to use this to sort of normalize across the board where we can. It's a good opportunity for us to also, as security professionals, I think we've spent a long time trying to just make sure that we've got the right tools in place to be able to see what's happening, respond to events, and I'll say contain issues that exist in our network. And now we're starting to move towards pushing those security controls closer and closer to the data, which is sort of the basis for zero trust, right? However it is that you look at it, it's the idea is that you're making sure that whoever's supposed to get access to the data is the only one getting access to it. And I think, being able to leverage that as a sort of, centralized term and getting the right components out there to be able to work with our private sector partners and making sure that we're all speaking that same language. I'll say that's probably the best thing that's come out of it. I think, fortunately, we've got a lot of smart folks, both at the in the private sector side and in the state side, that understand that, yes, the marketing piece of it is not necessarily descriptive of everything that's going on. But just as you heard on the call, we all understand what the deal is and what it is that we're working towards, which is great. I think that kind of hits the mark between making sure we're meeting our business needs as well as making sure that we're getting the actual security component done. As far as the Nist piece, or the frameworks piece, we're also a big Nist shop. No surprise, proximity to DC and the suppliers and stuff that we work with, they all have to follow Nist requirements. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us to be in that boat. I also kind of like the fact that the Nist frameworks and the Nist documents have just sort of gained more and more popularity over time just because they work, right? I mean, fundamentally, if you don't have to create something brand new, then don't. I think that those products have just proven their success over time. And the fact that they don't necessarily have to change in great amounts is just a testament to the fact that it's working really well. There's stuff to add, there's modifications, don't get me wrong, but you're not talking about a wholesale rewrite. We've been on this stable set of requirements for a number of years now. And that just goes to reinforce that, the security community in general is getting better at what we're doing and standardizing more and more on a lot of the stuff, which is great for everyone, for us as people trying to defend the data, and our partners for trying to help us get the right tools and resources to make it work.
Great, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, so, zero trust is the new buzzword, but to what extent does this differ from what we used to call role-based access control? They're not identical, but they're really similar, but that's not something that gets people excited. Zero trust really does. The frameworks, the Nist framework is not perfect. I helped build it. That should be enough to tell you that. They're revising it right now. There's a data call out for one that will do a better job reflecting things like supply chain, especially software supply chain. But I think frameworks are particularly, we've all talked about pick one and use it. I think frameworks are good. Because from my perspective, having been in this business for a very long time, having run big programs where people said, this is terrible. Do you need more money? Do you need us to change the law? What do you need to make things better? The honest answer is the biggest problem in cybersecurity, from my perspective, is not people, process, and certainly not technology. We've really got secure ways to do things if we want to invest in it. It's metrics. It's ironic that for something that's based on ones and zeros, measurable things in computer science, we stink at saying, if I do this, this is the outcome on security. And that really handicaps our ability to say, how do we want to fix this? How do we want to optimize this? When a lot of times it can't even tell you, if I do this, what is the outcome going to be on security? And yes, part of it is because there's a threat actor and it takes two and it's interactive, but part of it is simply because too often we're throwing darts at a dartboard in terms of trying to gauge effect. And frameworks at least give you a way of saying, I'm throwing the darts in the right direction.
Thank you for that. Yes, so at ATARC, we have a zero trust lab. And before I get into that, marketing does have a little something to do with it. Our least privilege lab, I don't know how that would have worked out, or role-based lab. The zero trust lab, we put a call out. We asked for vendors to participate in it. We had about 12 government-wide use cases put together by a group of federal government people, and I think we have 58 people in the lab. So marketing does have something to do with something else. And speaking of ones and zeros, our next poll is about how do you expect your organization budget to change in the next few years? So this is an interesting question here, and of course the audience for those of you in government or those that you serve the government, I'm kind of interested to see, and we'll go into a little bit on that in our next question. I always looked at cybersecurity. Somebody told me we're like insurance salesmen. We're like making sure something bad doesn't happen to you. And I think as things are, as we've seen in pandemic, serving your citizens is so important, and it's important to cybersecurity. Okay, there we go. I don't know if that's super surprising. But my next question is, I'd love your comments about it. But also I want to touch base with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and what activities happening around that. And then I want to talk a little bit about a working group we're starting up, but maybe we'll start off with you, Lester. As far as budget and the IIJA and where your head's at on that.
Yeah, and so let me start off by going back a little bit further, because there's been multiple funding cycles, right? And so I think that's important to know. In Maricopa County, we were extremely fortunate with the original CARES Act funding that came out to successfully get quite a bit of funding to improve our posture along those lines. And I think part of the reason why, and I know that's by agency basis, right? So there's a certain amount of eye of the beholder that's occurring with regards to how those monies were disseminated once they trickle down from the federal government down to states, locals, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that we did, and we continue to do with this current round of funding, so I've just recently met with my CIO, my assistant CISO, come up with a game plan of what we're going to ask for along those lines. But a lot of that is based off of the intent and the times that have occurred. So in the case of our CARES Act funding, one of the things that we saw in Maricopa County was, we kind of, to Alex's description of his environment, from an application perspective, we had a lot of homegrown applications, right? And then all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, we saw exponential demand to expose those applications to the internet and make them available online. And they weren't designed that way. And so from a security perspective, huge red flags. And so part of what we were successful in getting in CARES Act funding was a hosted web application firewall services. So at least we could put some basic controls in place in front of these applications that needed to get exposed to the internet. And so I bring that up as an example from back then, but also as we're moving based off of this current round of funding that's available to state and local governments with respect to the challenges that we're facing as a result. In this instance, from an infrastructure perspective, we're seeing this becoming more of a demand from ranging from just the change in how public sector services are being delivered all the way to organizations. Maricopa County is no different in trying to get our arms around the whole digital divide and how the pandemic has really exacerbated that particular issue that's been around forever and a day. And so there's obviously a cybersecurity element with that. We've been very fortunate in our support by our board of supervisors with regards to that. And so we continue to build upon our previous success with the CARES Act fundings that we got to move forward with other sorts of things. We're focused on enhanced wireless security, insider threat technology, et cetera, et cetera.
Great, thank you for that. Michael, Greg?
Yeah, I think the big one, looking at that poll, and when I look at that poll and I see that most believe that their budgets will grow slowly, but not a lot over the next few years. The big area in that for me that I would point out would be the fact that you have to show value of the program. So going back to kind of what Jim said, for us at least, those have been our key performance indicators and our key goal indicators, being able to map that progress. So as a part of that, for example, to get increased funding, we need to be able to show the value of those programs we deliver. So as an example, we went through and we looked at phishing. Phishing's about half our workload that we work on any given day or any given week. So we looked at ways to implement machine learning and AI into that process. So what we did was we measured before and we measured afterwards the changes in these playbooks that we made for security operations team. We were able to reduce down the amount of people we need to run the operation by about 2.17 FTEs per year. So we reduced our ability or increased our ability to work these incidents. That's allowed us to grow to get closer to that 250,000 with the same amount of funding that we've previously had. And it's given us a path to show that with a little bit more funding, the great things that we can do for the state. As far as IIJA, very interested in it, but kind of as Lester kind of alluded to, it's a little different than with CARES funding, because with CARES funding, you kind of got the money. For IIJA, my understanding is 80% goes local, 20% goes to the state, and there's a percent the state has to pay each year, and that percent goes up over the terms of IIJA. So while we're interested in it, I'm still waiting for the final, all the documentation to come out from the federal government to understand how we can best utilize this funding and what we can do to help those local partners that are going to get that 80% chunk.
Yep, and Michael Dent, who's a CISO from Fairfax County, I don't know if you know Mike, I'm sure you do, Michael Watson. He was like, okay, we get this money, it's fantastic. What happens year 2? You don't have the money anymore, right? The tail, you know, so interesting. Alex?
Yeah, so short answer on this one, we're not really impacted by either of those acts. So, but we do expect, you know, our budget to continue to increase, you know, over the next few years to address, you know, current threats, and also, you know, us migrating from on-premise to the cloud. Most of it, you know, most of that money is going towards infrastructure.
Great. Mike Watson?
So I'm gonna try to be optimistic, right? I'm optimistic that this is going to, you know, help our locals and get us in a really great spot in the future. What I really think that it does is it helps remove the initial barrier to entry for those organizations that need that capital investment. What it doesn't do is fix the underlying problem of, you know, some sort of actual dedicated budget to cybersecurity at our local levels, which we know is generally not there. I mean, you know, it sounds like, you know, Michael over in North Dakota has things under control, but but a lot of us, you know, in the states that aren't necessarily completely connected to, you know, the state side of government or have a very distributed setup, don't necessarily have that same level of consistent investment that needs to be out there. Folks like you know, Michael Dennett at Fairfax, who's runs a tight ship, knows and has the ability to put the right, you know, resources in place. I'm sure he needs more. I mean, we all need a few more things. Don't get me wrong, but that whole concept of being able to bring to ease some of that capital investment piece is good. The states, the question really I think is going to come down to is, are the states going to take over the funding for the localities? I think it's going to be a tough road to get them there, because I you know, most of the states have taken a specific stance already on this for varying other sources of funding, whether it's education or healthcare or whatever it may be. We already sort of have lines drawn. And I don't know, and to the point made already, I don't know that there's going to be, you know, subsequent funding for localities in perpetuity coming out of the state funds. It makes it a little bit of a tough relationship. And the other part is, like, we want the localities to actually do the investment. We want them to swim on their own or fish on their own, or whatever you want to call it. You know, going forward, I think it does help bridge that initial conversation, though, and eases that capital investment part that's necessary for any sort of new security venture.
Great, thank you for that. Jim, how can you help these folks? What would you suggest to them on how they should apply for this?
So let me tell you, well, okay, so $1.2 trillion, some of it's coming out by formula, so it's based on your state population. Some of it's competitive, so it's a jump ball, how good your grants are, how fast they come in. But there's a real problem here, guys, and that is, let's look at the 25 programs that are going, that local government can directly compete for. They come out of 6 or 7 different agencies, and even the White House guidance that pulled it all together in a catalog didn't say, hey, all of these infrastructures have a digital dimension. You might want to facilitate connectivity between them. I call it the digital field of dreams. Can I tell you how wastewater and bridges talking to each other would be good? No, if I knew, I'd be funding a startup and trying to get me money. But when President Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Bill, we had no idea how that was going to transform American life. So now is the time at the front end for you to say, we might want to think about that connectivity. But let me tell you the bare minimum you ought to do. Interoperability of that threat data. A lot of us have talked about, yes, what you're doing with, sticks and taxi to facilitate that. I can tell you, you're going to have a bad day in the SOC when you say, oh, look, here's a threat that's in the power sector, and now it's gone to wastewater or transportation. Too bad they keep score a different way and we can't see it. That's like first responders after 9/11, when the federal government threw a lot of money at enhancing capability. Left to their own devices, local departments would do things like buy radios that worked on different frequencies. And it took that multi-jurisdictional disaster to make us realize this is an easy problem to address at the front end with specification. It's a whole lot harder to fix once people have spent the money. So now's your opportunity to kind of channel these people and say, okay, let's figure out how we want to rationalize this.
Thank you for that, Jim. Let's do one last poll, which is going to lead into your final comments, because we're closer to the end of the beginning here. What keeps you awake at night? I'm really trying to get you nightmares today. Thanks for joining us on this panel. I'm kind of interested to see what's going to be the answer here. I'm not going to skew it. That's bad polling. Okay, what do we have, folks? I was expecting workforce actually to be up there, but it is up there actually. So let's just go through everybody real quick. What's keeping you awake, Lester?
Yeah, so, and again, I don't want to minimize the impact of ransomware or some of the other, oldies but goodies, so to speak, in terms of cyber threats. But what's keeping me up at night is how over the last 2 years in particular, things have changed such that my portfolio of services has had to expand to accommodate for that. And a big reason for that is social media. And so in particular, misinformation and disinformation campaigns against my organization, and I'm sure lots of yours on the call, not only are indications or indicators of increased risk from a cyber perspective, but also kinetic and physical risk. And so my team, my ops team in particular, spends an inordinate amount of time monitoring social media because it's a threat vector, but it's also a source of intelligence. And we can't afford to ignore that. And so we've had to change, whether it's incident response plans or just our operational day-to-day activities to accommodate for this new reality. And as a result, whether we want to or not, we've also gotten more directly involved from a communication perspective around increased physical risk to the organization. So, the White House or the DOJ at the behest of the White House has created a task force around improving security and protection of elected officials and election-based staff because of all the threats, of harm and things of that sort. And so Maricopa County has been no different, and my team has been more intimately involved based off of the nature of the intelligence and reconnaissance that they do with social media, and having a hand in passing that information along when appropriate. So that's something in particular that keeps me up at night.
Great, thank you for that, Lester. Mike Watson?
I think, it will depend on the day. But I do think that the combination of the current the current conflict overseas is a new one where I don't have with the cyber attacks and things that are going on, right? Ransomware, I know what they're after. I know what they're trying to do, right? We, even with some of the activities we've sort of seen in the past with a lot of the targeted for getting personal information, I know what they want. this conflict overseas is new, and it doesn't really have a necessarily a defined, like, these are the things that are going to happen in the case, that they end up turning their ire towards the states directly or towards state resources directly. And that's the thing that makes me, I'll say, the most nervous. I think that we're generally prepared to be able to handle whatever happens at the cyber level, but fundamentally, what the ripple effect of that looks like, or what the weird things that may kind of come out of that, I don't know that I have a great feel for it. And I don't think there's any way to, right? I mean, we can talk through exercises and everything, but we all, as you mentioned, by your famous philosopher earlier, right? When you get punched in the face, you just don't know what's going to happen next. And that's kind of where I think we are with this. We're waiting to see if somebody's going to take the swing or not. So that's kind of what I think keeps me most up at night. I think we, as security professionals, we're always used to a little bit more level of strain somewhere. So the ransomware and the other things that we deal with day to day are stuff that the Ambient helps with. But this might be a little bit above that at this point.
Thanks. The unknown unknowns. Michael, Greg.
Yeah, I'm going to take this a little bit different direction. I would agree with the potential conflict we see going on with Russia and Ukraine. That's a big one, but I would categorize that into a bigger bucket or area of unknown, meaning the unknowns, unfortunately, are what keep me up at night. So as an example, I'm pushing hard to get 100% coverage of my tools. And the big reason why I want 100% coverage of my tools is if I know I have 5 systems in my environment that need to be patched, I can go and I can prioritize those 5 systems. If I get hit with new emerging threats, be it hafnium, SolarWinds, whatever it may happen to be, and I don't know where those systems are, or if I have those systems or not, I don't know how to address that particular issue. So for me, it's always the unknown that I want more information, more knowledge, and more their threat intelligence as far as what's in the environment and the types of threats and what the threat actors are doing.
Great, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so all good stuff mentioned. And, I'll come back to the unknowns. I didn't have that as my top, but my top is, workforce, right? So the market for cyber talent is through the roof right now. Especially coming back off of the pandemic, being at home, which changed everyone's work-life balance and changed their work environment. Now many organizations are offering 100% work from home. We've had several people leave, for salaries that we can't match. And oh, by the way, you can work at home 100% of the time, right? Whereas the state, we're only offering partial work from home. So trying to attain talent or get talent and keep it, retain it, is a challenge that we're pretty much using every tool in our tool belt to do that, whether it's hiring full FTEs or contractors or using MSSP. So we're using the all hands approach from that standpoint. And COVID really changed it, made us, we used to be able to compete on work-life balance here at the state. We can't really do that post-pandemic. So we have to change our strategy as well. And then to the unknowns, right? Log4j, right? That to me, that drove home the need for a strong asset management, right? You have to know what's in your environment. That's SANS top 20 control number one and number 2, hardware and software and hardware asset management. So with these unknown threats, I really think it's important. Like if you think about, we talked about frameworks earlier. If you think about the cybersecurity framework, identify, detect, respond, recover. So identification, right, is extremely important. Then being able to detect, what's in your environment. Those 2 particular pieces, those 2 particular control families become extremely important when you're dealing with unknown and responding to unknown threats.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad you brought up the workforce in particular. I think there's some folks out there working a couple of jobs now. If I can work from home, I can kind of juggle a couple of jobs. So how do you compete with that? 2 salaries, Tim, another one in the books here. Final comments?
Okay, so Tom, what keeps me awake at night is the balance problem. And I don't mean work-life balance. I mean, I'm coming at this from a career, at the federal government level. I feel your pain, guys. And now here I am in the private sector. I'm happy to swing the mallet with you and play whack-a-mole on threats. What I want to do is also help you recognize there are strategic approaches and strategic solutions to it that they're not going to answer what your boss is screaming at you needs to be put out, but there are things like the ability to apply AI and automation to turn the attack surface from a liability into, I'll go back to my Intel roots, a collection platform that can actually help you get ahead of the bad guys. So it's helping you solve your immediate problems, but avoiding being stuck in Groundhog Day where you're going to face the exact same problem the next day. Can we move the needle for you long term?
Well, thank you for that, Jim. And thank you, Lester, Mike, Michael, Alex. Great panel. We went a little over time. I got a little lost there on the time. You guys were too interesting. We got bonus extra time there. Thank you to the audience. Great questions, great participation. Last poll. Do you need a CPE credit mailed to you? That's an important one. And then have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much. And oh yes, the next event we have is the 26th Emerging Technology Virtual Summit. That's going to be a good one. We'll get some great people on there. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon.